Before I started my career in radio, I realized that most DJs make about as much money as the average street performer out there in the 16th Street Mall. And shifted gears, I worked as a copywriter, as an editor, and I really shifted gears and ran off to Europe and played American football for a few seasons over there, which is kind of like being a professional badminton player or something here. But it was really fun. And that led me to come back to the States, and I worked for NFL Films in production for a while. That ultimately led me to Coupe Studios, so 27 resume there. We are going to talk about sonic branding today. Is anyone here functionally illiterate? Do I have to read my slides? I don't have to read my slides. I do want to ask, I know we have one person here, at least from an agency. Can I see a show of hands of brand direct versus agency? How many people here work for one brand rather than an agency that works for multiple brands? Okay. So maybe half and half. Okay. Agency people, any big agency people? Like more than 100 people or so? One? Okay. All right. So this is fun for me because normally that's who I'm talking to. I'm not giving this talk before, but normally who we're interacting with are big ad agencies. Big ad agencies have been pretty hip to sonic branding for a while now. It's starting to become more known. So the good news is for all of you people who aren't at a big agency is if you do want to implement a sonic brand strategy, your process, we found, typically takes about 1/3 of the time as it would if you were working through a big agency, and the cost is pretty commensurate with that as well. So it's about 1/3 of the cost as well. This is such a small group, and I'm just a very normal person, so I want to encourage you guys to just shout out questions at any moment. Seriously, I don't have a flow. You're not going to throw me off the flow. So just yell out anything you think of at any time. Little background. What are we really talking about? Low volume, high volume clip, but that's okay. If you guys crank that up, I'll play it again. Let's start that over.
Or the sonic brand, if you will. Is a short, distinctive melody or other sequence of simple It's usually positioned at the beginning or end of a commercial. It can be considered as the acoustic equivalent of a visual logo.
So those are audio logos that you just heard. Probably all of us know all of those. That's the most, I guess the sonic logo is the most visual element in the sonic brand. It doesn't make sense, but it's what we think of. But that's not all there is to it. So here's what else we're going to cover today. Why does sonic branding work so effectively? 2, what components are there besides an audio logo? 3, what are some applications where you can use sound for your brand, and some of the best practices? And then 4th, we'll just follow a hypothetical customer during his audio experience with a single brand on a single day, just to bring it all on. So, why does this work so well? We're going to spend a little time just talking about biology. So sound is our first contact with the world. At the formative stage, inside our mother's belly, we hear and even memorize sounds. The most important of those sounds being the sound of our mother's heartbeat. We learn really quickly that 60 beats a minute or something in that range, that means mom is calm and everything's okay. So due in part to that early biological exposure, we are naturally sensitive to sounds and their meanings. Audio also activates us more quickly than any other stimulant, because, evolutionarily speaking, hearing and instinctively reacting to that sound of a predator creeping up behind you meant the difference between life and death. So if you didn't respond immediately to that sound, you're out of the gene pool. Those of us that made it this far all had ancestors who responded really quickly to sound. Vision, obviously, very critical to survival, also, but it engages after hearing, and it's less likely to trigger the memory sectors of the brain. I'm going to play something else again here. The voice you're about to hear is Walter Benzola, who created some of the best known audio logos in the world, including that classic Intel Inside sound that we all know.
I could play you 0.5 seconds of tainted love of that one sound, and you recognize it or beat it. So many of the sounds, you just need a split second and you know the sound, and it creates all the emotion of it.
So getting back to that predator example, we are truly hardwired for this reaction. Hearing goes straight to the hippocampus. So when you hear a sad song, even before you consciously recognize what that song is, you know it might make you feel sad. Even my 4-year-old son, who pooped his pants twice yesterday, even he knows that a song in a minor key is supposed to feel sad, and a song in a major key is happy. We know this stuff. So we know it affects us powerfully, but how does it actually translate to work for your brand and selling some products? Well, it turns out it translates really well. Research at the University of Leicester in the UK discovered that brands that use music that's aligned with their identity are 96% more likely to be remembered by the consumer. We know that. That's why we call them earworms. They stick. More research at Stanford drilled down even further, learning that there are particular musical techniques, especially creating pause, that actually arrest attention and trigger memory retention. We'll geek out on a little more research here. Ipsos did a study 2 years ago. This was not intended to be a study about sonic branding at all. What they did was covered about 2,000 different television commercials, measured audience responses in terms of how different brand assets affected brand impact. So we've got things like package shape, color, celebrity endorsers across the bottom there. And our y-axis measures brand attention and ultimately effectiveness, or just defines that. What I really want to draw attention to here is if this were at all legible, you would see that item way down there at the end, the highest one, that's sonic brand cues. Down here, we've got sort of what we would expect to be the highest performing things: slogans, logos, a little closer to the left side here, a little more effective, celebrity endorsers. But still, above that, in audio, characters, think about like flow from progressive characters, higher performing than celebrity endorsements. But at the top of it all, sonic brand cues. So the term, the term sonic branding is trending, but this is not something totally new. They've been around for a century. We just used to call them jingles, and that's not that cool to use the word jingle anymore, so now we call it sonic branding. One of the first ones was by the Wheaties Quartet. They used to sing their 40-second breakfast jingle live on the radio every week. So we've come a long way from an a cappella song being sung live, but the principles are the same. Take advantage of the natural power that sound has over us to shape opinions of a brand and drive sales. So what is new? The challenge is new. We have to cut through an immense amount of clutter. Consumers are drowning in content, particularly visual content, ads, videos, all this stuff. They have massive fatigue, which translates to be a massive challenge for marketers. The opportunity is we now have more channels than ever to reach leads who are often more pre-qualified than ever before. Apps, podcasts, hyper-targeted streaming radio, virtual assistants like Siri and Alexa, whole messaging, etc. We've got more ways to reach our audience than we've ever had in history. What assets make up an audio brand besides that audio logo? That's up top. We often call them mnemonics. Original music is another component, sound design, and a signature voice. So we'll go through each of these things. Excuse me. So we've already talked about what a mnemonic is and why they work. I want to play you a couple of other audio files here to illustrate the point that a great mnemonic is so powerful that you can change it up within reason and still maintain your brand. You can't think about an audio logo without coming to mind from McDonald's. Perfect example of how an audio logo also needs an occasional brand refresh, a promotion-specific version, or a geographic take. So I'm not even going to bother playing the original. You all know the original. Here are a few refreshes of the McDonald's that they had us done. One was for a breakfast promotion. I can't remember what the other ones even were, but it illustrates how you can play around with an audio logo, keep it recognizable, keep it on brand, but also keep it fresh.
What a beautiful sound.
So you play around, you can hear the common thread through all those, obviously, that signature melody is in there. So let's move on to talk about branded music a little bit. Brand anthem. Classic example of this would be United Airlines using Rhapsody in Blue for all those years. You couldn't hear that song without thinking of United after that. But even more often, it's an ownable song. And that's something that we'll talk a little bit more about next. But let's talk about some other ways that you can think about music for your brand beyond just library music. Artist collaboration. This one usually gets you a lot of free press. But you need to make sure you're okay with the baggage that an artist brings. Taco Bell, I think, is a great example of a brand who has partnered with two really controversial artists in Lil Nas X and Doja Cat. Probably very few of us in this room would want any of our brands to be represented by either of those musicians, as much as we may enjoy their music. Really controversial. It'd be pretty hard to sell most of those. See the Montero video where Lil Nas X is pole dancing for Satan. That's a tough sell. But Taco Bell, hey, not a bad fit for them. They haven't taken any heat for these alliances. In fact, they're doing really well with them. So, you just need to be good with the baggage that this artist brings and being authentic to the brand. Another thing that's not taken advantage of as often as it could be is user-generated content. You have never seen a more motivated brand ambassador or promoter for your brand than a publicity-hungry starving artist. So you could do something like invite your brand's fans who are musicians to cover your brand's song. Make it a contest. You can imagine how that multiplies if they send that out to their fan base, trying to get people to vote for their song, and how that can exponentially grow. And then versions. As with a mnemonic, version of your music can also be a really powerful tool. Give an example of some version for music that we did for called a local company, Arrow Electronics, which is the biggest company in Colorado. But they happen to be based here. They are very much an international company, and they asked us to adapt their branded music for specific markets. So we adapted that for what you're about to hear. We'll hear a version of the Arrow song, sort of the original mnemonic, and a version we did for the UK, a version for the rural US market, and a version for China. Here at the end there, that signature Arrow melody that always comes in. A point I want to emphasize on there is the need for authenticity. If you're creating something for the Chinese market, you promise to make it authentically Chinese, you better use authentic instruments, bring in real players. That authenticity is so key when working with music. Take a look at, quickly, a little bit more research. SoundOut did some studies showing which audible attributes correlate best to recall. Not surprisingly, the top attribute is catchiness. There are some surprises though. So things like catchiness, being family-oriented, childlike, welcoming, joyful, those rank very high with brand impact. But bad news, if your client makes pickup trucks, let's say, on the right side here, the worst performing musical attributes: authoritative, defiant, tough sounding. Those actually have a negative impact on recall. So even if you're selling something like a pickup, you want a tough sounding song, it's worth considering how that may affect a brand recall. Other studies have shown similar results regarding music as affecting willingness to pay, as very strong correlation. The next piece of sonic branding overall that I want to talk about. So we talked about the audio logo, we talked about music a little bit. I want to talk about signature voice talent. Every brand talks about achieving a distinctive voice, that voice of the brand. And for these brands, that means literally. So we've got Allstate, Dennis Taster, Kaiser Permanente, Allison Janney is their voice. Esurance, of course, John Krasinski. There was a period of probably 10 years where every voiceover casting that we would get at the studio, the client would want that. We want somebody who sounds real, not an actor, like Jim from The Office, the guy on the Esurance things. Very popular spec for voiceover for a decade or so. So finding a unique voice talent can add recognizability, credibility in a way that we can last for a very long time if you continue using them. Getting back to that Ipsos study that we looked at, where we saw that celebrity actually performed worse than a character. I think that this is a great example here. The Allstate guy, great example of how a distinct voice is even more effective than the celebrity. And if you were sitting here thinking, oh, sonic branding stuff sounds overwhelming, I would suggest that this item, voice talent, that's the easiest way to establish a sonic brand on your own. Most of the other things that we're talking about here, music, audio logos, that kind of thing, you're probably going to need to partner with somebody who does this to implement that. But a signature voice talent, if you're not working for a gigantic corporation that requires you to use union talent, this is something you can could probably do yourself. Find a voice that you love, hire them, and sign them to an abusive contract for the rest of their life. You got your brand voice. I want to talk about how this stuff ties together. If we take a step further and look at some specific applications, here are some examples of that. So most brands have an app these days. That's another opportunity to extend your brand through audio. Final step is to bring it into the real world. If you have a physical location that your customers visit, think about opportunities for sound there. The sound heard when your office phones ring, or when a customer walks in the door of your brick and mortar. This particular case study is an unusual one. This was for Oxygen, which is they probably wouldn't like to comment on that. They're a fintech, a financial technology company. Really cool company out of the Bay Area who provide financial services specifically targeted at people like this guy, entrepreneurs. So it's mostly people who are self-employed or running their own businesses. Oxygen has a very hip brand. They want to be seen as something really, really cutting edge and cool. So they came to us and asked us to develop a full sonic brand package for them. And we took an unusual workflow on this one, where instead of starting with an audio logo like we often do, we actually started with a full-length piece of music. So they made us this little video, basically just pulled together out of stock footage, so forgive the visuals here, but they gave us this to inspire us, hey, this is what our customers look like. Create a piece of music for us. So play that out first. So we created this music, and from that derived that. Alright, so that here comes the audio logo. Here's some app sounds. So they have an app and they wanted notification sounds for you just spent that, or you just got paid. So we developed a suite of sounds, in this case, that were actually derived from the song. So when we were creating the song, besides the electronic instruments in there and the acoustic instruments in there, there's also a bunch of sound design elements that are associated with their brand. So things like coins, cash registers opening, credit card machines, things like that. And the process was really fun because we got to go back after we created the music and we got into the app sound design. We had this conversation with them, we started doing research, and we actually ended up going back to the song, revisiting it, and putting in more of those little nuggets. So it's a really fun, iterative process when you get to collaborate with the hands-on client. I want to make this a little bit more concrete for you all and share some best practices for implementing a sonic brand for whoever you're working for, whether it's if you're an internal person at an organization or if you're at an agency to share with your clients. The first one is invest in the planning stage. The beginning is really, really key. A great brief and understanding of the business's challenges is a must. We all know that. We just have to remember that when we're talking about sound. Thinking long term, what I mean here is being thoughtful about your goals. What is your KPI? Is it time spent on the site? Is it number of new podcast subscribers? Is it moving the sales needle? Or is it just an awareness play? And a lot of times with site branding, it is an awareness play. So it may be difficult to measure. But I encourage you to challenge your assumptions about what success looks like, or sounds like. Option to listen later or a too long didn't listen version. One of the key principles is that sound fits less intrusively in our audience's lives. What I mean by that is, if you're going to ask a customer or a prospect to watch a video, that's going to require a commitment from them. They're going to have to focus all their attention, probably during the workday, sitting at their desk, pulling up that video and watching it. Sound is less intrusive because if you give them a podcast to listen to, they can listen to that on their drive home. They can listen to it when they wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning and can't fall back asleep. They can multitask and have that podcast running in the background while they're doing other things at work. Honor that, honor their time, and make it fit into their lives unobtrusively. Leverage your existing content and think creatively about this. There are some obvious things like blog posts. Blog posts could really easily be converted into an audio format to be a short podcast. But beyond that, brochures, ebooks, white papers, even things like product manuals. Imagine installing your new Wi-Fi router with a voice assistant guiding you so that your hands are free to actually plug in those cables, things like that. And then consider the full customer journey. And we'll get into that, but just the idea here is remember the entire life cycle of interaction with that customer, and there are a surprisingly high number of touch points where you can reach them by audio. Best practices tech edition. 3 is the magic number. After 3 seconds of hearing something, we stop hearing and we start listening. The difference here is that 3 seconds or less, something comes into us. It goes straight to the hippocampus and it affects us more or less without the involvement of the rest of the brain. Over 3 seconds becomes active listening. You start engaging with the content. So that doesn't mean it's necessarily a bad thing, but it's a different thing. So it's less instinctive, it's less reactionary. If it's a jingle that goes on longer, you might start singing along to it, or humming along, or anticipating what the next note in that series is going to be. So it's a different thing. It's important to consider that. These next few items are focused on things like a podcast, where you all might be more likely to produce it yourselves rather than going to a studio. Mixing for the right output is really important. The question to ask there is, how are people going to be consuming your content? Are they listening on AirPods, or are you running a pre-roll commercial in movie theater with a huge 70-speaker Atmos surround sound system? You're going to be mixing that commercial very differently for those 2 environments. Write it down. Transcription. This is critically important for SEO. So this applies mostly to videos and podcasts. So for SEO, so that they can find the content that's within that podcast or video. But it's also helpful for those of us who like to scan a transcript to cut to the chase, or for people with accessibility issues. Two great transcription options. One of them is Rev, another one you mentioned earlier, Nick, which is Descript. Descript, they should probably be paying us because it's an amazing product. As Nick was saying, with a click of a button, you can remove all the uhs and the ums, you can cut out sections. So if you want to produce a podcast for your company yourself, Descript is a really great way to edit that content without learning how to be an audio engineer. Investing in quality. This is really important. How annoying is it when you're listening to a podcast and you have to constantly be riding the volume button? If you can't record your podcast in a professional studio, at least invest in a good microphone. Be thoughtful about your music, about your sound design, about your mixing, all that stuff. Let's talk about some specific applications and some less expected applications for branded audio. So let's start with how most of us got here today, or how we start most of our days in our car. That sound that reminds you to buckle your seatbelt, there's an opportunity for a sonic brand. It's something telling you that your passenger rear door is open. Again, these days, even the sound of the electric motor itself, car companies are engaging with companies like mine to create the sounds of those engines. You know, they're required to have a sound at below a certain miles per hour so the pedestrians can hear the car approaching. And a lot of thought goes into what those sound like. It's really fun to work on. Think about other devices that you might have in your home. The sound of the timer at the end of cooking in the microwave. The sound of your clothes dryer when the clothes are dry. There are a lot of appliances in the home these days that have sound for each opportunities for touch points. Smart speaker integration. There's a ton you can do here, whether it's a medical device, recipes, whatever, obviously. But the main reason I wanted to bring this up to you all is to encourage you to register your invocation words for your brands. Has anybody done this process yet, getting an invocation word set up on Alexa? Anybody doing stuff with custom skills with Alexa? Okay, well, it may not be relevant, but if you do ever want to have your own custom Alexa skill, which can be really, really good, and the stuff that you can have her do is amazing. But you need to register an invocation word with Amazon, and you should do that soon because I'm convinced it's only a matter of time before this becomes like website domains where pirates start snatching up all the good invocation words and selling them back to us. So if you are interested in doing that, finding out more about that, hit me up afterwards. I can tell you how to get started. We'll look at applications in a few specific industries. Most of us are driven totally nuts by the sound of the chaos of a casino gaming floor. But there was a study done a few years ago that showed that slot machines that are muted actually bring in 26% less income than the ones that have the sounds. That interactivity is really a powerful, engaging tool for consumers. They want to hear something when they do something. They want to have that. Those audio cues are apparently really important. At least they're 26% worth importance here. Healthcare. This is a really interesting one. Some innovative folks in the healthcare industry, product manufacturers, hospital groups, have started really paying attention to how sound affects patients. So they're looking at, let's say the alert tones. I mean, it's not as bad as a casino floor, but if you ever visited someone in the ICU, it's almost as bad as a casino floor. The constant beeping, all these things, they cause cortisol levels to rise. They stress us out, these machines beeping and whirring and doing all these things. So some work is being done to make those sounds more pleasant. The other really cool thing that's happening in healthcare right now is around using sound in a therapeutic way. Really serious research is showing that there are tangible benefits, measurable improvements in patient outcome using sound therapy. Creating environments in the patient rooms and the public areas of the hospital where there's pleasing sounds happening. It's actually creating measurable effects on people's health. I often say to my staff when we get stressed out about a job, hey, we're just making music here, we're not saving lives, but no, maybe we will be. Product design, this is another interesting area. Axe body spray is an interesting case study here. They spent pretty major resources engineering the most pleasing sounding hiss for their sprayer. So as the product leaves the can, that sound, it doesn't sound that way because that's just how the thing is built. The cap, or the top of this rocket-looking spray can here, that actually is engineered to create the most pleasing hiss sound. So they did tons of research where they tested all kinds of different sound frequencies, playing with all kinds of things, smaller apertures, bigger apertures. What they ended up doing was essentially a speaker enclosure that goes around the sprayer that lets the sound of the spray reverberate around that chamber, become less high-pitched, more smooth-sounding, a wider sound that people found more pleasant. And yes, I don't know if you can read that. If you can, you probably wish that you could. But Axe Body Spray created a cryptocurrency scented body spray. It's very disappointing that we've reached peak bro factor and society is doomed. Crypto scented Axe Body Spray. Give up now. So lots of possibilities for sound, but huge missed opportunity for not using it. So we know how effective sound can be, but sonic brand cues, on average, are about 8% of brand assets across industries. So obviously that's a huge missed opportunity for brands to improve audience attention and recall of their creative. So I say it's time to embrace audio and its rightful place of power within your arsenal. Show of hands, do you have a brand book for your organization where you've got like, here's how you use the logo, here's our font. Okay, so few folks have it. A brand book, I would encourage you, if you don't have it already, I think you should, and of course I also think that you should include audio in that brand book. If you want to have consistency across all of your visual materials, you should also have consistency across all of your audio materials. If you have an art director, but no music director, maybe you don't need a music director if you're not doing it all the time, but at least partner with an organization that can provide you with some expertise when it comes to audio. So I promised a customer journey. This is going to be an example of how a single brand, how many touch points you can create as one brand with one consumer in a single day. And I don't know, we'll come up with a fictional character. We'll call him the Dude. with Spotify. Tom talked a little bit about moving towards this future where privacy laws aren't going to give us as easy tracking ability on consumers as we have now. Cookies are going away for the most part. We have to find other ways of tracking consumers. Hyper-targeted streaming audio, Pandora, Spotify, these are incredibly great ways to hyper-target. If you want to serve an ad only to 26 to 30-year-old Asian American women who live in Akron, Ohio, and who also purchased a new car in the last 2 years, like, it's crazy how targeted you can get with streaming audio. And because you can be so targeted, you can reduce your ad spend also. You can just serve that ad to the people you need to. So in the dude's case, he lives for bowling. Spotify knows this, and he gets served an ad for a new bowling ball. So he decides to head down to the store and buy that bowling ball. Once he's inside the store, the dude buys that fancy new ball that he heard on the ad. He's also serenaded by thoughtfully curated neoclassical music, which is proven to increase willingness to pay, also increase the tolerance of spending. So certain types of music have certain attributes that translate to triggering certain thought patterns. So neoclassical music happens to be one that makes you spend more money. There are other kinds of music that will make you buy more drinks. There are kinds of music that have been shown to improve the perceived flavor of food. If you have a restaurant, you don't necessarily want to have that, do you need neoclassical music in a restaurant? Do you need to increase people's willingness to spend? Or is it more important to have them elevate their perception of the flavor of your food? There's a lot of things you can do with that in the brick and mortar environment. But that neoclassical music, that inspired him to splurge $200 extra on a luxury bowling ball bag, at least modestly priced receptacle for his new bowling ball. So, with his new bowling ball in hand and his new fancy ball bag, the dude hops back in his car and starts driving home. So on that bowling ball case, on the box there was a QR code. It is a getting to know your new bowling ball audio guide. Great opportunity to walk through a product's features. Bowling ball is a terrible example for me to explain this, but if you have a more technical product, let's say it's a home appliance or something like that, an audio guide is a great way to provide informational content, sort of care and feeding of your new whatever it may be. So he listens to that, and at the end of that guide, he learns that the brand also has a weekly podcast. It's all about bowling, so of course he subscribes to that, and he shares it with his friends. So again, we're taking advantage of that viral effect here. On the podcast, dude learns about the brand's app. That app provides all kinds of audio-only content. It also includes leaderboards, which leads him to share the app with friends and enemies alike. And this image is in no way relevant, but I just thought that I would be remiss if I didn't include it here. The rug that ties the whole room together is the audio logo for that bowling ball brand. The dude heard it on the Spotify ad. He heard it again when he was in the store. He heard it again in the instructional guide, on the podcast, and within the app. That sonic logo, by the way, features the sound of a perfect bowl and strike. And that's a fun trick that you might recognize from Southwest Airlines. They did this more effectively than I think anybody in the world ever has. When you hear that seatbelt chime, it doesn't matter whether you're on Southwest Airlines or any other airlines. You hear, and your next thought is, you're now free to move about the country. It's brilliant. So this is a way you can take advantage of that. This bowling ball company included the sound of strike in their audio logo, and now whenever the dude is at the bowling alley, he hears the ball roll into the pins. You all think of that bowling ball company again. So I want to, especially because this is such a small group, I want to just breeze through this as quick as I can and leave time for specific questions. So I'll leave this slide up here. These are a few resources. There's my contact info, and I would love to just have a conversation now and talk about how you all may or may not yet be using audio for your own companies and your own clients. I was especially excited to hear that you folks from the museum are here. I think that's, man, what a great environment to be able to play with sound there for your visitors. Are you all doing anything with that yet?
We do a lot in our exhibits. Podcasts like our has a podcast. So we're doing a little bit, but we don't have and we do a lot in terms of Pandora ads, TV ads, you name it. Different mediums. So yeah, it's something I put it in our notes and tagged our boss.
There's a technology that I meant to talk about earlier, but I think you all kind of give a good case study for it anyway. A technology that has gotten much better in the last few years is directional speakers. So these are usually mounted in the ceiling. We're starting to use them a lot in supermarkets. So let's say you walk over to a product display in the supermarket, super directional speakers aim sound in a very narrow field. So if I'm standing in front of this product display, someone standing next to me, motion triggered directional speakers can deliver a message just to me, and that person next to me won't hear it. It's not only effective, it's also really fun and really freaky, because if you ever experience this, it feels a little bit like the voices inside your head. You start trusting the sound a little bit, but there's a lot of really cool things that you can do with hyperdirectional speakers, especially in the retail environment. I'm eager to hear if anybody else is already doing something with audio or have thoughts. Does anybody have a podcast for their organization? Yes. Okay. And how do you produce it yourselves, or do you work with a recording studio to do it?
We produce it We produce it ourselves. We have employees and team members who even podcast for their own. They have their own separate one as well. And so we invite different people to come on our podcast and speak. I think we come out with at least one podcast a month. It's typical. Yeah.
That's great. Yeah, branded podcasts can be so insanely effective. They're really inexpensive to produce. And I love what you all are doing with it. When you invite other people onto your podcast, there's that multiplier effect. That person who's a guest on your podcast is going to promote your podcast. It's a really effective kind of multi-level marketing kind of thing.
So we'll do that, and we'll do learning bites.
Awesome. Hugely powerful thing. And again, it's like that efficiency of content. Tom touched on this again, like where if you've got a long piece of content, trim that up in little bite-sized nuggets. Do that with audio too.
And it's mainly members who then want to create learning bites, who say I have some information that I can share, and they'll just do it.
Yeah, I mean, I think, if podcasts are the children of radio, radio is kind of the originator of the user-generated content that, people would call into radio shows. I guess they still do. There's still radio still a thing, right? People still call in. Great way, again, to get that multiplier effect.
Yeah.
Cool. Anybody else doing a podcast? Should be.
I have two questions. The first one is on impersonators. Because I'm just thinking of the user experience, right? So like TikTok or like this guy Nunez who impersonates Gary Vee, but then like using him and hiring him to talk in that voice on Spotify to listeners who are subscribed to Gary Vee's audio experience, you see what I'm saying? Because I'm like a very like a practitioner level advertiser, so I'm always looking for that unfair advantage.
Yeah.
So like going that route, is that gray, or is that like, is that going to be challenging to actually get that across the line? The second thing is, are you going to work with Tesla to work on their sonic branding for your engines?
Oh, man, I wish.
Yeah.
That is an interesting, the question about using celebrity impersonators. So we have done that a ton for pitches, things that won't necessarily be seen by the world at large. So, just in fact, just a few weeks ago, did a pitch, big ad agency who was pitching a big car company, and we brought in celebrity impersonators because their pitch was, hey, we're going to have these 3 huge celebrities driving around in this vehicle. That said, even though it was an internal presentation, they were super concerned about it at leaking out because it is a gray area. And, the legal standard, at least in music, for infringement is, people always talk about like, oh well, if you use 5 seconds of a song, it's free, or if you use 3 notes out of those 4 notes, it's not infringement. Not true. Infringement, the definition when it comes to music is, did you intend to capitalize from the other word? So you can change the key, you can change the lyrics, but if the impression that it gives any reasonable person that you were trying to gain value by exploiting someone else's musical composition, or maybe in this place, someone else's voice, then you're probably a host.
And it's funny because like on TikTok and other platforms, technically of where that could be a problem, or on YouTube, it doesn't get slammed. But it's kind of like the whole thing with Cameo.com, right? Where if you don't have the Cameo watermark, then they're like, we'll come after you. We will always find you. But it is that gray area that I've had with clients who are more on that level of really trying to find the unfair advantage. They're always trying to look for a way. And I figured with your background and understanding the audio composition side, voice may not be regulated yet, but on an impersonation side, but you never know. I mean, that's one of those things that marketers ruin everything, right? I mean, it's like, so I guess I'm part of the tribe. And tell me about Tesla, or what the ops are. Do you guys have ops for EV companies, or are you looking to do that?
So we are not doing anything with engine sounds yet. But we just, I wish I could talk about this, but it's not yet. We just finished the first phase of a project with an airline, and we are having some fun with cabin sounds and onboard music, and starting to play with technology. The directional speakers that I mentioned earlier, an offshoot of that is allowing us to start to play with the idea of active noise canceling inside the plane environment itself. So, many of us have these noise canceling headphones. Those work by flipping the phase of the audio signal coming in. We're starting to play with that in our settings too. So, yeah. Well, any other questions? We've got a few minutes left.
I have one more. Sorry. This is so interesting to me. You guys are going to go. I'm going to go. The last question is, you were talking around audio branding, and you said like a visual brand guide, having one that's specifically for audio is again where I see an unfair advantage, because if you were talking about the 8%, which means there's 92% upside. And a lot of people, they ask the question of what's going to change in 10 years? And I'm thinking, what's not going to change? Right? So it's flipping that around. And so what would your advice be on, for singular brands, influencers, and or even mid-market companies, which a lot of folks here are working for? Where would that spread be as far as like how you would create that? Would you go the long form style and then, start drafting and picking things out of that? Or would you start at like the lexicons used for your brand that you would focus on an audio perspective for like intent-based Alexa, then go down from there? Like, where does it start? With a song, with a quote, with a word? Where do you go from there?
Yeah. So ideally, we've developed brand guidelines for companies who have no brand guidelines at all, like startups like Oxygen. We've also more often done for companies who already have a brand, but for their visual brand. You're going to use this font for headlines, this font for sub-headlines. You're going to use this color logo in this application. It'll be located here. It'll be this size, blah, 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 blah. In either of those instances, whether we're creating it from scratch or if we're adding audio into an existing visual brand guidelines, the process is essentially the same. So it's going to be structured basically just like a visual brand. We use this song as our brand song. We use these 20 songs for social content. We use these pieces of music for certain holidays, maybe if we're posting content that needs music on those days. We use this person for our brand commercials. We use other voices for our social content where we don't want to pay our celebrity endorsements. So if you need casting voices over time for social content, that voice should sound authoritative, trustworthy, whatever those attributes are. So in terms of how it's organized, it's just like a visual.
Thank you.
Anything else?
Thank you.
Hi, so this is just basically from my own curiosity. I know companies are currently making and diving into the world of NFTs visually. Do you see it being that same way with audio? And if so, how will that be structured? Because I know some albums or even podcasts might be released in an NFT metaverse space. So how are you diving into that, or where do you see that going?
Yeah, great question regarding NFTs. So I think the original Audible NFT was when Wu-Tang Clan released that album. This is before NFTs were even a thing. For those of you who may not know, Wu-Tang Clan released an album that there was only one copy of. And it sold the Pharma Bro, Martin Shkreli, he was owned it at one time. So there are NFTs in music, I think it's a really natural fit. We are working right now with a label that's interested in doing NFTs with their artists. So some of the things that they're considering are one-off music files, albums, and a few other things. I see my time is about to end this up, so I better take the last question.
I'm sorry. Thank you so much. It's just, maybe you've kind of already answered this, but how can you start to think about what the voice should be for your organization? Thinking about the Denver Museum of Nature and Science, we're a cultural institution. We connect with many audiences. So how can we, mainly from a DAI standpoint, how can we identify what that voice should be And how do we start that process? If you have any advice on that.
When you say voice, do you mean actual, like literally voiceover talent?
Yeah, I mean, because we do use voiceover talent, and it kind of changes based on what we're doing. We don't have a central voice, you know. Just thinking about one campaign we did for an exhibition we recently opened for Space Odyssey. That was from a child's perspective, so that was a child's voice, you know. But that wouldn't work for, you know, all of our more general promotions. So what any advice on that would be very helpful. Yeah.
Great question. So I think it's wholly appropriate and advisable to do what you're already doing, which is match a voice with a specific campaign so that you can be most effective in that campaign. With a brand voice, you're probably talking about, you know, manifesto videos, fundraiser things, where that voice probably should be something that does represent the overall brand of the organization and is going to feel appropriate for all of that messaging. And I think that probably just goes back to your brand DNA and the same words that you would use to describe what does the museum represent to people. You'd want your voice to represent those same qualities.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it. All right, well, let's go to lunch.